Right, welcome everybody. I hope you enjoy this book club. I'm going to share my screen now. If it will let me. Here we go. So I'm going to go through just one pattern or sort of group of small patterns or anti-patterns from each part of the book. There's 4 parts of the book, and we'll go through one for each bit, and then afterwards we can do some Q&A, whatever you want to ask. So first of all, you've had a little introduction from me, but I do a lot of training, coaching, and consulting with businesses on architecture and also on communication and patterns. And I have just published a book with O'Reilly called Communication Patterns, which is what we're looking at today. There's a website to go with it, communicationpatternsbook.com. And if you head there, there's some bonus materials for that. You can find me on various social media. So feel free to find me on Mastodon, LinkedIn, and there's also my website, JacquiRead.com. So a quick introduction. We're talking a bit about soft skills because that's the area that the book covers. I've got someone here called Nikki, and she's got this dilemma. Does she go the technical route or a management route? And what skills does she actually need for these? And we're going to have a quick look at this because people don't really know this, but it's not really a big secret. And when Nikki goes to conferences or she's got a training budget, then she has this question to tech or not to tech. And I like to say, alas, poor Yorick, your time is precious, so you should be asking that question. But we tend to try and solve problems with technical skills because we've spent a lot of time on these technical skills, and we use them all day in our jobs. And when we try and solve everything with technical skills, it doesn't solve everything, does it? We kind of know that, but we still try. We feel this pressure to focus on our technical skills. We're going back to Nikki. She's been thinking, what skills do I need? And there's a fairly simple answer to this, and that is that you actually need soft skills for both of these career paths. So whichever one you want, you should be developing your soft skills. And we're going to have a look at some of those today. Now, one of the parts of the book is called visual communication, and this is all about successfully conveying your message with your visuals, but also getting what you need in return. And we've got one pattern in this, and the main reason that I wrote this part of the book is that this is a skill that's really not taught. I mean, the rest of the book isn't really taught in tech either, but this was the real drive to actually write the book, in that people don't ever get taught about how to create visuals that communicate properly. So we'll look at one of the patterns from the book, and this one I call face in the crowd. It's also known as know your audience. So we kind of all know really that different audiences need different levels of detail and different types of diagram. But quite often we forget to think about it at certain times. So when you create every single different diagram that you do, or other visuals like graphs and things like that, you really need to think who it's for. And you'll probably find that some of your diagrams are for one particular group of people, maybe developers and architects, and some of them are for completely different people, like project managers or even C-suite, and some of them have a bit of a mix of people, and that makes it a bit more difficult to consider what you're going to put in that diagram. So there's a few questions you can ask yourself. The first one of those is, what's their technical understanding? Maybe you've got quite a technical project manager, maybe they're very non-technical. With your product owner, do they really want to know about your technology choice, or do they just want to know how it's met the requirements? You also need to consider what level of detail they're going to need. If you're presenting to an architectural review board, there might be a lot of detail needed. It might be different types of detail depending on what you're doing. If you're doing creating stuff for the development team, do they need all the implementation details, or do they just need to know what they need to fit within when they do the implementation themselves? That's the second question. Then you also need to think about what these people in their audience want from you. And meeting their needs is the key to successful communication. You need to keep them happy. So what do they want from you? What information do they need? What assurance maybe do they need from you? And then last but not least, this is the question that most people forget, and that's what do you want from them? And this is a little bit sort of, you might think of it a bit chicken and egg, that kind of thing, but just because they want something from you doesn't mean that that's all they need from you. So you might need them to sign off on a decision or make a decision, but if you're only considering what they have said their needs are, you're probably going to miss something because they don't know everything that they want. So you need to think, what do you need to get back from them? And therefore, what do you need to give them so that they can give that back to you? Very cyclic. And so we can have a look at some diagrams like this. We've got one here, which is a class diagram. And have a think about who this is for. In fact, you might be able to put in the chat what you think, who you think this diagram might be for. Anybody got any thoughts on that? There we go, I found my chat on a different screen. Right, engineer, developer, yep, that's the kind of people who are going to be looking at this kind of diagram. If you gave this diagram to somebody like a project manager, they wouldn't understand what it meant. It's always a good idea to put a key. That's one of the other patterns in the book, because people can't remember everything, all the little eccentricities in UML. So this is going to be for like database developers or engineers, that kind of thing. When we look at a diagram such as this one, which is a C4 context diagram, so for those who haven't seen C4 or used it much, I can recommend going to c4model.com and have a look at that. But these are quite useful, these diagrams. This is the top level, so this is looking at that polyglot media system in the middle there. So who do you think this kind of diagram might be for? You could try putting that in the chat again. Who would find this kind of context useful? Product owner, that's a good one. Anything else? Project managers. Brilliant. Yes, this is going to be useful for sort of non-technical people, but actually it's also useful for the technical people. Even someone who's a developer working down in the depths of the code is going to find that useful because they need to understand the context. So this one's for non-technical, but also technical. People need to understand the context of a system. So that's our pattern from the visual part of the book. Now we're going to have a look at the knowledge section of the book. And this is very much not just documentation. This is about maintaining your knowledge and curating it, and also creating that documentation as well. So the pattern from this, I've chosen the architecture decision records because it's not just for architects. Other people should be consulting these, and even actually creating different types of decision records. They can actually be applied to lots of areas of the business. So let's have a look at these. The decision ADRs, or decision records, are something that records what decision was made, but also the reasoning behind it. And there's two kind of types, really, overall types. One is a lightweight record, which records a decision that was made and all the context and the reasoning around it so that people in the future can understand it. Then the other type is for actually enabling the decision process itself. And so those contain quite a lot more information because other people have added in their input to them. And it's been used normally for sort of a major decision. And all these decision records are really for avoiding some various problems. So the first of those problems is when you end up changing something that turns out to be quite an important decision. And if you haven't got that recorded at all, you may end up changing something and it then not meeting the requirements, like changing a particular technology when it was made, the decision was made for a reason. And now you've spent lots of money and time and effort on that. And wow, now we've wasted all of that. So having those decision records means that you can refer to them and not waste your time and money. Then there's what Birgitta Bokler, who works at ThoughtWorks, she calls these whack-a-mole decisions because they keep popping up and you keep having to push them back down again. And these are ones which the people keep thinking, oh, why was that done? Why didn't we do it this way? And they waste time each time going, oh, okay, yes, there was a good reason for that. So that's those. Then there's onboarding. If you're onboarding people onto a team or a project, if they've got these decision records, they can just read through them. And therefore, you're not wasting the time of people in that team who probably don't have all the answers in their head anyway, trying to explain things. So part of your onboarding process is just, here's all the decision records, so have a go with those. And then we have the problem of staff turnover. And I'm sure everyone's experienced this when somebody leaves and you suddenly realize that a lot of information was still in their head. So if you have these decision records, then you've got at least that information out of their head. And in the book and on the website, there are some examples. The two examples here on the left-hand side are actually all part of one large decision enabling record. And the one on the right is a smaller version of the same thing, with the not having the sort of enabling sort of decision process part of it. And so if you go to the website, you can get text and graphic versions of these. And there's also a template which you can use as well. But creating these ADRs is not the end of the story. You really need to think about where you're going to store these, whether they're architecture decision records or another type. People need to be able to find them easily and access them in their normal workflow, because if they can't, then you're not going to get them to use these. So that's a very critical, important thing. If everybody's usually using SharePoint or everyone's using Notion, even if you'd rather not use that yourself, that's where you should put all of your decision records, because then people will use them. And then if you really want to migrate everybody, you can fight that fight another day. But put them where people will actually use them. So I like to use this umbrella and sort of overarching term of business decision records, of which architecture decision records are just one of those. And if we think about this, there's quite a few areas that are fairly easy just to think about. So how about procurement decision records? When you're going out, if it might be formal tender, or it might just be making a simple decision. But when you're choosing between products, you can record which product that you've chosen and why. And that's very useful when you end up with lots of products in a business and you're trying to consolidate down to one or a few. They're very useful to use. Then you can think about security decision records and why you've implemented various processes or policies and things like that. And that can be at a business level or at a project level. you can use hiring decision records. So if you're in HR, you probably have lots of people who have lots of notes about why they chose particular people in when they hired them. And it's probably useful to centralize that kind of information, especially if you get people querying it at a later time. And then there's strategy, and this is even higher level. It can be sort of the C-suite sort of strategy. It can be lower level sort of different strategies. And it's thinking about why the business is doing things in different ways and recording that so that everybody knows why. When you come back to it, it makes it a lot easier. So I've got another guy here. This is Vlad. And when he onboards onto a particular product, he needs to get up to speed quickly. And he can do that because he can just go and find all the architecture decision records, and then he'll know what's going on with this product. All the major decisions will be recorded for him. But also, now he's thinking, oh, what about the authentication and the authorization on this product? What do I need to know about that? And so he can just look for a security decision record, or maybe you have forms that you fill in with the security team. And he's saved so much time that he can do that over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. It's a very useful thing to have decision records. So if you don't have them, I highly recommend them. Now, another part of the book is about communicating remotely. And this is all about having distributed teams and customers, people in different time zones, things like that. And the pattern I've chosen from this section, which is all about kind of benefiting from all those advantages of having a remote team whilst trying to mitigate the disadvantages. I've chosen the pattern async to think, which is all about using asynchronous and synchronous communication in the best ways. So first of all, a couple of definitions. So synchronous communication relies on all parties being available at the same time and responding in real time. That's the key thing here. Whether people are in the same room or whether they're like us at the moment, this is synchronous. This is real time. Unless you're watching the recording afterwards, then it's asynchronous. So there you go. Asynchronous communication does not assume or expect the recipient to pick up or respond to that message as soon as it's received. So when you have these videos like on YouTube, that's asynchronous. When you send a message on Slack and you don't expect people to respond to it straight away, or an email, that's also asynchronous. And the overall message here is that you actually need a combination of both of these. Anyone who says you need to move everything to asynchronous or you need to move everything to synchronous, it doesn't work. There's always going to be times when you need one or the other, whatever situation you're in. And one of the keys to working this out is the direction of communication. So unidirectional or one-way communication tends to work best as a asynchronous communication. It's when you're maybe making an announcement, that kind of thing. So you might be talking to just one person, or you might be talking to a very large group of people. And bringing people together for that kind of interrupts their time. And even if people are just coming together online, it means they've got to context switch. It just kind of interrupts their time, and it has lots of downsides. But when you have bidirectional communication, quite often synchronous can be the best way to do it, but it really, really depends. So here's some different examples here. With synchronous, if you're trying to build rapport or do some team building, then synchronous, even if that's online, tends to be the best way to do that. If you want to generate ideas, again, synchronous is a good way to do this. And that's sort of problem solving or maybe generating creative ideas, that kind of thing. If you're doing that together at the same time, that tends to work best synchronously. If you're trying to gather feedback from something, so this might be a survey, it might be getting comments on a document, it might be creating a decision record and getting feedback on it before the decision's made. That tends to work best asynchronously, because there's no point in getting everyone together just to all make notes on a document at the same time. Also, if you're disseminating information, like I said before, if you're making an announcement, it tends to be best to use asynchronous, although if it's a negative announcement, I would recommend not doing that asynchronously. If it's bad news, that tends to be because it'll probably end up being more bi-directional. When you're reporting progress on something, like you might be involved in a stand-up meeting, or it might be project progress meeting, that varies a bit. It will depend how much feedback you want from things. So a stand-up meeting is often quite useful, especially if you've got people on your team who are less experienced. If you are just all reporting on project progress and everyone's only saying exactly the same thing as is written down on a document or in a wiki or something, then there's not really much point in getting everyone together to do that. Everyone can just read it in their own time. So as you can see, it all depends. Another pattern I can give you is the asynchronous sandwich. And I hope you've eaten at the moment, because otherwise you might get a bit hungry. But the asynchronous sandwich, or if you've got a bit of a sweet tooth, you can call it an asynchronous macaron. I think I prefer that. But the whole idea of this sandwich is that the things that benefit from being synchronous should all be squeezed into this synchronous time, because you probably don't have that much of this synchronous time. And then other things can be put before and after that synchronous communication, which goes in the middle there. And so the idea here is that your meeting, say in the synchronous meeting, is just a nice short meeting where everybody does what they need to do in that all benefits from being synchronous. And then anything that was preparation or anything that needs to be done afterwards, like assigning what needs to be done after this meeting, that can be done outside of that synchronous time. So the big message here is put thought into picking your communication methods, because there's lots of little nuances as to how it's going to work for you. Now, final part that we're going to have a look at today. The part in the book includes written, verbal and non-verbal communication, but we're going to have a look at the written part of it. And this is actually one of my favorite anti-patterns. And it's called MLAH, also known as multiple letter acronym hell. And yes, it is a bit silly. It's a bit of a play on words. People don't tend to like acronyms, do they? And the big message in this one is that you should only use defined acronyms. And I'm going to suggest some places where you can define them. But in speech, when you're talking to people, you can say the acronym and then also say the definition as well. So one of the acronyms I've used in this is AKA, also known as. And if you say both of those things, the definition and the acronym, you're giving people the chance to learn it, so that the next time someone says the acronym, they can understand it. If you only say the full version of it, then they don't get the chance to learn the acronym. If you are writing things down, then if you define the acronym the first time you use it, when you're writing it, and you also might want to put it in a key, if it's in a diagram, in a glossary, if you've got one of those. And how often you repeat that definition will depend on sort of how big the document is. If it's really big, you might want to include it at the beginning of each part or each chapter or whatever it is you're writing. If it's shorter, you probably only need to do it once at the beginning. So here we have a few acronyms that you might know. So you can have a go in the chat again here. I want to see if anyone gets these. Does anyone know the acronym DRY, what it stands for? Interested to see if people know this. If you want, you can also just take yourself off mute and call it out if you really want. Otherwise, put in the chat. Don't repeat yourself. Well done. Excellent. Right. Next one. DFD. This one is a little bit harder. But the second D is diagram. There we go. Data flow diagram. Well done. And the next one, SPA. Anyone know what SPA is? Single page app. Well done. And then how about BLT? Everyone should know this one. Yes, bacon, lettuce, and tomato. Or is it business leadership team? Is it basic language translator? Is it bulk loading tool? Or is it just be like that? You get the point. It could be so many different things. And even in the same context, you can get people thinking that things need the same, mean different things. So even if people end up going to the same school or university and then end up in the same job, they can still end up thinking that things mean different things. So all these different acronyms, you can have a load of people in a room and people all thinking something means something different. And it's easy to fall into thinking that others have the same understanding as you. It's called the curse of knowledge. And you forget what it's like to not know things. And you might find this when you're talking to somebody about something and you realize that to understand what you're talking to them about, they also need to know this and they need to know that, and to know that they need to know something else, and you end up with this tree of knowledge that people need to know. And it can be very difficult to then talk to people about things, and you have to work this all out. But at least it kind of makes you think, oh, actually I have learned something in my career. So there's a silver lining to it. But next time you are using an acronym, you can think SIDI, which stands for state it and define it. And yes, I am being a bit silly there, but I did just state it and then define it. So that's the way to remember that one. So let's go back to Nikki. She was thinking, what skills do I need? And we've come to the conclusion, soft skills are going to be useful whichever way she goes. And therefore, we don't really need to make that decision at the point of actually learning these soft skills. And maybe it means that we can actually move between things as well in the future. But also, it can lead to promotion as well. It can open up these opportunities, and you can use all these skills that you're learning with your manager, with your colleagues, with your customers. You can even use them at home if you're learning these various communication skills. So, as I mentioned before, the book has its own website, and you can find all the information there. All the different figures from the book are on the website as well. And I'm very happy now to do some Q&A with everybody. So if you've got any questions, feel free. You can either put them in the chat, or you can just call them out. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacqui. That was really great. I do have a few questions, and so one of the whilst you were talking through this, right now I'm working in teams where there are about 20 teams, and it's a very complex project. So you can imagine the communication that's required. So what is your recommendation of how you run, say, demos and retros and the whole agile process with some 20 teams of, say, 6 to 10 members each?
With sort of various agile teams, a lot of people like to try and use these various scaled agile frameworks. And I think that's a big anti-pattern for me, because the whole point of agile is that people should be actually making changes when they need to. And if you're saying that every single team in the company needs to do things in exactly the same way, then that's clearly not agile, because every single team isn't the same. So I think the key thing here is to not try and make everybody do everything in exactly the same way. One useful pattern for that is to think about sort of interfaces and like API interfaces. You can use that kind of between teams. There's a concept called team APIs, which might be worth looking up, which is to do with team topologies. So I can recommend having a look at that. And so it would mean that your teams are kind of free to do things the way that works for them internally. And then they have ways of communicating with each other, which are kind of defined by the various different teams. And some of those ways might be defined further up the business. But yeah, team APIs is something to look up there.
Thank you. And regarding the synchronous and asynchronous communication in teams as large as these, what would your I know the answer is like what works, but then if everyone turns up for the meeting, it's everyone's time that's wasted. So how do you manage this most effectively?
Yeah, I see what you mean. If you have 20 people in a 1 hour meeting, that's 20 hours of time, isn't it? I think, as I was saying earlier about with your audience, you're thinking about what you want to get out of your audience, not what they want to get from you. So that's one of the key things, is to think about what outcomes do we want from this meeting, and or from this communication. And if just everybody being there doesn't meet that outcome, if it's just going to waste people's time, then you're probably looking more at the asynchronous. But the thing is, you can't just say, oh, okay, we're going to scrap this meeting completely, because some of what happens in that meeting might work well synchronously. And so you might find that some of the things you do can be done in a 10-15 minute synchronous meeting, and then other things can be done asynchronously. So I think you need to kind of break it apart and work out which bits will work best. But I think experimenting is one of the key things here. A lot of people think, oh, this is going to get harder, so it's not worth it. But actually just try and experiment with things and see what works and what doesn't. Because if you don't try, then you never find out if something could be better or not. Right, I'm going to have a quick look in the chat. Right, one question here. How to encourage developers to write down ADRs? Yep, it can be difficult, but I think part of it is showing them the benefits of ADRs. And if you start creating them yourself, people can start to see the benefits of it. So start creating them yourself, show people those benefits that I was talking about earlier with the not wasting time and things like that. The workflow, which I talked about earlier, if people are using SharePoint, then put them in SharePoint, even if you don't really want to. But it's about making something part of the workflow rather than trying to force people into doing these things. And yes, so yeah, those are probably the main two things. But I think the thing is, you can't force or make people do things unless you end up doing horrible things like saying, oh, if you haven't written these ADRs, then you're not going to get your bonus or something like that. So yeah, try and use a carrot rather than a stick. Right, any more questions in the chat? Can't see any at the moment.
Question if
Oh, we've got a hand up. Yes.
if that's right. I was just wondering if you had any tips for like, I really liked your chapter on diagrams, and I thought there's a lot of good tips, but I often end up having to send emails to clients with like a lot of data analysis. So I'm trying to put graphics kind of into an email. And I sometimes find it quite tricky to make the email readable, concise, but then still integrate enough detail to really explain where we're coming from. Do you have any particular tips for like integrating diagrams or generally kind of analysis into an email?
It can be quite tricky with an email because different email clients will show things in different ways. Yeah. So if you have to use email to communicate with people, then it can be quite useful to sort of create maybe a PDF or something that goes with it that people can look at. If you don't have to use email, then if you're able to just like share a document or a wiki page or something like that, that's probably one of the best ways to do it. Because if you are putting stuff in an email, if you are creating a document and attaching it to an email, you then have a copy of that which you've just created, and maybe you then send it to 5 different people, and then maybe you get feedback from somebody that there's something wrong in it, and then you've got a new version of it and you send that to 5 different people, and you can see how that gets very out of hand. So if you can create one master version and share it with people, that's the ideal. But if you really have to use an email, then probably creating a PDF with it to get it so that people can understand it and see it, that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's often with clients, so it kind of has to be email, but I think that is an interesting idea to use PDF just for the formatting. Yeah, thank you.
So following on with Irina's question on the ADR records, what is the best structure for ADR and SDR records? Traditionally, I've just written some basic details in a Word document. Do you have any recommendations of structure for these?
Well, there's quite a few different templates you can find, and I think it's quite useful to experiment here a bit as well. But if you have a look on the book website, there is a template there and some examples of using that template in the 2 different ways which I talked about, which was the more detailed way where it enables the decision to be made, and then the other way. So that's what I'd recommend. Have a look on the website for that.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Sonika. I have a quick question. These days, most of the people like work in agile teams. So there is no one defined architecture, and it's like keep on evolving as the time goes. So, and because they're like flattened teams, no one is an architect. They're like senior, junior devs, all making changes to the architecture. So is there any pattern for that? Like any suggestions, like how to handle the changes, which are like very frequent?
Yeah, it can be very tricky when you've got that situation. But I think one of the things is that you do need to accept that change is going to happen a lot, because even if you had one team, you probably still get one small team, you'd probably still get a lot of change happening. And I think in that case, the decision records can be quite useful. It's important not to just document absolutely everything, but when you get people to stop and think about things, then you may end up having sort of less changes overall, because people actually consider things more before they make that change. And then earlier I also talked about the team APIs and communicating between the teams. So you might find those useful, and also thinking about how you could sort of synchronize the teams together so that people know what's going on. So maybe that becomes some sort of asynchronous sort of change log update, where when people make changes, they put this into some kind of change log that everyone can look at. Or it might be that you decide that it's some kind of synchronous meeting where maybe the sort of leads from each team get together for half an hour every 2 weeks or something like that. So I think, yeah, doing some coordination and communication is probably the way to sort of help with that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, thank you.
I have a follow-on question. Actually, Sonika's question is a very good one. And we usually find like teams a flat one with everyone contributing, versus also teams where you have a architect and they do the changes. With respect to communication in the context, is there a preferred model here of teams?
No, I'm going to say the classic architect answer to that is it depends. So with every single situation is going to be unique to that particular company, to that particular team. So you can't kind of just say, oh yes, this is the model of teams to go. One area that's quite interesting if you want to learn about team organization is team topologies, and there's a very good book called Team Topologies, which I can recommend having a look at. But that talks about the different types of teams and how you can organize within your business. So I can recommend that. Right, possible question. I think that's probably a fairly technical one. Oh, thank you for somebody putting team topologies in the chat. Irina, I'll probably have to get back to you on that one, because that's quite a technical one. So if there's any other questions, very happy to have a look at those.
I might just ask
Actually,
in communication and synchronous and asynchronous. Do you have any tips as a more junior member of a team when there is a little bit more of a hierarchy? Just kind of asking for feedback or other. Sorry, I haven't phrased this too well. I'm just thinking like in terms of like maybe pushing for a little bit more synchronous communication, or like, do you have any tips for as a more junior member of the team? How do you how can you suggest changes to the team in a way that kind of comes across well? I feel like, I think we could be communicating a little bit better, but it's a little bit harder to lead by example, maybe as a junior member of the team. Do you have any tips with that?
Yeah, I think if you're somebody who doesn't have that kind of power within a team or an organization, it's quite often sort of, you said you can't lead by example, but I think even if you're not a leader, you can. And if you can find ways of doing things slightly differently that then improve the way you work, other people are going to get interested in that. But also you can communicate the benefits of things to people. So if you are looking at, you've got this horrible 2-hour meeting every week, which you think is a complete waste of time, you can talk to people about the benefits of shortening that meeting and moving some of the aspects of it into asynchronous communication. And once people sort of understand that things should be better, that by changing it, then you might be able to convince them to actually experiment with it. You don't have to say to people, we have to change this, this is the right way to do it. You can say, could we experiment with this? Could we try reducing the length of that meeting and moving these activities into an asynchronous thing, which is done when people need to in their own time. And you just might be able to convince people. But the trouble is, even if you're actually the lead person, you can't just sweep in there and just make changes, because people need to kind of feel that they're in control of things. And if you move that locus of control to external to them, if you just come in and say, this is how we're now going to work, then people don't really want to do that, and they try and go back to the ways that they're familiar with. So even if you are a leader, you need to kind of get people to all come together and work these things out together, because then people they have got some kind of control over it. So it needs to be a team effort to make these changes. Good question. Any other ones? Brilliant. Well, I hope you have all got something out of this evening. I've really enjoyed it. And take a look at the book website, and all you need to know is on there.
Thank you, Jacqui,
Thank you
for
so
your time.
much.